When I opened the bedroom door that Thursday evening, Brianna laughed before she saw me. It was the kind of laugh a woman only makes in a room she believes belongs to her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood there in the doorway in the same soft grey sweatsuit my daughter had packed for me 8 days earlier. And I felt the stitches under my shirt tug a little when my chest rose. The incision was still tender. The hospital bracelet was still on my wrist. In my right hand, rolled tight, was a single envelope from my father's old attorney. And in that moment, everything my father had ever told me about paperwork came back to me like a key turning in a lock. Before we go any further tonight, if stories like this speak to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there, where you are right now? Sometimes late at night, knowing someone else is out there listening makes all the difference in the world. The strange thing about betrayal is that it rarely arrives the way women imagine it will. It doesn't always come with a slammed door or a letter on the kitchen counter. Sometimes it comes through the paint samples a young woman carries into your kitchen. Sometimes it comes through the new pendant light a man hangs above a marble island while you're upstairs counting pills before a surgery. And sometimes it comes through a laugh in your own bedroom, carried down the stairs of a house you have lived in for 38 years. A house no one in that bedroom understood did not belong to either of them. My name is Ruth Caldwell. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that a marriage was a kind of house you built together, brick by brick, year by year, until one day you looked up and realized the walls were so thick, nothing could ever knock them down. I believed that. I taught second graders for 34 years, and I told them every September that a family was the strongest building in the world. I meant every word of it. I was wrong about almost none of it except for one thing. The house I had lived in with my husband Gerald was not a house we had built together. It had been built long before Gerald Caldwell ever knocked on my daddy's screen door with flowers in his hand and a borrowed sports coat on his back. It had been built by my father with his own 2 hands, on land that had been in his family since 1964, and the only name that had ever been on its deed was mine. Gerald didn't know that. In 38 years of marriage, he had never once asked. And I, in all those same years, had never once felt the need to tell him. My daddy used to say that a woman doesn't need to speak every true thing out loud. Some true things, he said, are strongest when they stay quiet. My father's name was Walter Hamilton, and if you had ever met him, you would have understood exactly the kind of quiet he meant. Daddy was a carpenter before he was anything else. He came up through the building trades in the 1950s, when a man with his skin and his accent had to build twice as well as the next man to get half the respect. He did it anyway. By the time I was born in 1959, Daddy had saved enough to buy a 2-acre parcel of land just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, on a street that wasn't even paved yet, under a pair of oak trees he said he had loved at first sight. He built the house himself, most of it with his own hands, between 1971 and 1973. My mama passed before he finished the second floor. She had lung trouble, and in those days a woman with lung trouble in our community did not always get the doctors she deserved. Daddy finished the house anyway. He said my mama had picked out the window in the upstairs bedroom before she died, and he was going to put that window in, even if he had to carry it up those stairs on his own back. Which is exactly what he did. When I turned 21 in 1980, Daddy drove me into downtown Charlotte and took me to a small, tidy law office on the second floor of a brick building on South Tryon Street. The lawyer's name was Charles Whittaker. He was a younger man then, maybe 40, with a calm face and a brown leather folder that already looked well used. Daddy signed some papers that afternoon. He put my name on the deed of the house. He explained to me in a voice so level it almost sounded bored that a trust had been created around the property. A life estate, he called it, so that the house and the land would always be mine, and no marriage and no divorce and no judge in the state of North Carolina could ever turn them into anything else. I was 21 years old. I didn't understand most of it. I remember asking him why, and I remember my father looking at me with the kind of expression he usually saved for the end of a sermon. "Ruthie," he said, "a house isn't the walls. A house is the name on the paper behind the walls. You can love a man with every part of you, but a house keeps what a house owns. And a name on a paper is the quietest kind of protection a woman can carry." I laughed at him. I told him he sounded like a man who had watched too many courthouse dramas on the television. Daddy didn't laugh. He just signed the papers, closed the brown leather folder, shook Charles Whittaker's hand, and drove me home along the same road I would later drive 1,000 times without ever thinking about what had happened in that office. I met Gerald Caldwell 6 years later. He was an architect, 4 years older than me, already working for a firm in Charlotte that designed the big, glass-fronted banks you still see on Tryon Street today. He was handsome in the way men were handsome in 1986. A small moustache, a straight back, a laugh that felt like sunlight when he turned it on you. He came to my classroom one afternoon to talk to the children about what it meant to design a building. He stayed after the bell rang to talk to me, and he kept talking to me for the next 38 years. My daddy met him twice before he gave his blessing. The first time he said almost nothing. The second time, on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands, he looked at Gerald a long while before he finally said, "He seems like a fine young man, Ruthie. But remember what I told you. A house keeps what a house owns." I told my daddy he was being dramatic. He just smiled at me and went back inside. Gerald and I married on a Saturday in June of 1987. We had one daughter, Denise, 2 years later. We moved into the house on Magnolia Lane, under the oaks Daddy had loved, and we made a life there. Denise grew up with her grandfather's pencil marks on the kitchen wall, the same way Daddy had measured me on that same wall when I was small. Gerald's career grew. My classroom filled with children year after year, until the years started feeling like a single long afternoon. We paid off the mortgage Daddy had helped us start. We put in a new roof in 1998, the year Daddy passed. When my father died, I sat for a long time with his brown leather folder in my lap. Inside were the original deed, the trust papers, a copy of Charles Whittaker's card, and a letter from my father, sealed with a single drop of wax the colour of dried oak. I put the folder in my cedar chest, in the bottom beneath the quilts, and I did not open it again for almost 26 years. I didn't think I needed to. I had a husband who loved me, a daughter who called me every Sunday, and a house that held the smell of coffee every morning, whether I made it or not. That is the life I had, and the life I believed I would have until the day I closed my eyes for the last time. I believed it so completely that when my cardiologist, Dr. Ellington, sat me down in his office last spring and told me I was going to need triple bypass surgery, the first thing I thought about was not whether I would live. The first thing I thought about was who would water the hydrangeas on the side of the house while I was gone. Gerald drove me to the hospital on a Monday morning in early June. He kissed my forehead at the door to the pre-op wing. He said he loved me. He said he would be there when I opened my eyes. He held my hand until the nurse gently separated our fingers. And somewhere in the back of my mind, somewhere so quiet I almost did not hear it, my father's voice said, very softly, "Paperwork matters." I did not think about those words again for 3 days. By the time I did, a great many quiet things had already been growing in tiny pieces right under my own roof for a great deal longer than I had ever allowed myself to notice. But the truth about quiet disrespect is that it does not begin on the day you finally see it. It begins much earlier. And if I am going to tell you this story honestly, I have to go back to the autumn before my surgery, when a young woman named Brianna Shaw first walked into my kitchen with a colour wheel in her hand and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The kitchen remodel was Gerald's idea. He brought it up one evening in September while we were eating baked chicken at the same table my daddy had built out of pine boards in 1975. The table had a scar across the corner where Denise had dropped a cast iron skillet on it when she was 12. Gerald used to call that scar our daughter's autograph. He hadn't called it that in some years, but I still thought of it that way. "The kitchen feels old, Ruthie," he said that evening, buttering a piece of cornbread. "Dated. The cabinets are original, the floor is original. Nothing about it feels like us anymore." I looked around. The cabinets were, in fact, original. My daddy had built them. He had hung each door with his own hands, and when the hinge on the pantry door had started to sag in 1992, I had tightened it myself with one of his old screwdrivers rather than replace it. The kitchen did not feel dated to me. It felt like my life. "What would you want to change?" I asked him. "Everything," Gerald said. "A new island, a real island, marble or quartz. New cabinets, new floor, new lighting, something clean and open." I smiled at him. I told him we could talk about it. I did not argue because arguing was not something Gerald and I had ever done well. In our marriage, I had always been the one who bent first. It had not felt like bending most of the time. It had felt like keeping the peace. My mother had taught me that the peace of a home was the wife's work, and I had never questioned whether that was fair. 2 weeks later, Gerald brought Brianna Shaw into my kitchen for the first time. She was 34 years old. I knew that because she told me so within the first 2 minutes, while she was still standing just inside my front door. She was a slim woman with very straight, dark hair that fell just past her shoulders, and she wore a cream-coloured sweater so soft it looked expensive from across the room. She had a leather portfolio under her arm and a thin silver chain around her throat, and when she smiled at me, her teeth were very white and very even. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "Gerald has told me so much about this house. I've been dying to see it." I remember thinking, in that first moment, that she had called him Gerald, not Mr. Caldwell, not your husband. Gerald. I remember also thinking that the way she said "this house" made it sound like something she had been reading about in a magazine, instead of something a man had built with his own hands 53 years earlier. I set those thoughts down gently, the way a woman my age learns to set down a small, unpleasant sound she has heard in the wall behind her bed. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was being unkind to a young woman I had only just met. I offered her coffee. She said she preferred tea. I made her tea. That afternoon, Brianna walked through my kitchen with a small laser device, that measured distances, and she wrote things down in a leather-bound notebook, and she said the word aesthetic more times than I thought any one person could say it in an hour. She ran her hand along the edge of my daddy's cabinets. She tapped her finger lightly on the countertop. She looked up at the ceiling and made a small, thoughtful sound that could have meant anything. "How long have you lived here, Ruth?" she asked me. She had stopped calling me Mrs. Caldwell somewhere around the 30-minute mark. 37 years, I said. My daughter grew up here. I grew up here before that. Oh, she said, and the word was exactly one syllable too long. How wonderful. It's such a family-feeling house. A family-feeling house. Those were the exact words she used. I remember them because I stood at my kitchen sink later that evening after she and Gerald had finished their walkthrough, and I rinsed out her teacup. And I said those 3 words to myself under my breath. A family-feeling house. As if a house was something you could rent the feeling of, like a hotel room with a fireplace. My father had a saying. He used to say that quiet disrespect grows in tiny pieces. A tone here, a look there. A sentence that could be interpreted 2 different ways if a woman tried hard enough to interpret it the gentle way. And if you let those tiny pieces pile up long enough without sweeping them away, my father said, they become a flaw. And one day, without knowing it, you find yourself standing on the floor of a house that does not love you anymore. I did not sweep that first afternoon away. I told myself I would be polite. I told myself Gerald had every right to hire an interior designer. I told myself a woman of 67 should not be jealous of a woman of 34. I told myself a great many things that evening, and I believed most of them. And the rest, I folded up small and put in the back of a drawer I did not plan to open. Brianna came back 3 days later. She came back again the following week. By the middle of October, she was coming to the house twice a week, sometimes more. Gerald said this was normal for a project of this size. I took his word for it because I had never remodeled a kitchen before, and I did not want to seem like the kind of wife who questioned her husband over a stranger's hours. The changes began small, the way changes always do. First, my tea kettle moved. I had kept the tea kettle on the back right burner for 37 years, because the back right burner was where my mother had kept her tea kettle in the house I had grown up in, which was also this house. One afternoon I came in from the grocery store and my tea kettle was sitting on the front left burner. Brianna was at the counter, flipping through a paint fan. "I hope you don't mind, Ruth," she said without looking up. "I moved the kettle. It was blocking the sight line from the back door to the stove. Better flow this way." I did not mind. That is what I told her. I did not mind. I took my groceries into the pantry. I unloaded them one by one, and I did not move the kettle back, because I did not want to be the kind of woman who made a scene over a tea kettle in front of a stranger. A few days after the kettle moved, my reading chair moved. It was an old wing-back chair, upholstered in a soft green fabric that had lived in the corner of the den for as long as I had been married. Gerald used to tease me about that chair. He said I spent more time in it than I did in our bed. One Saturday afternoon, I came in from the garden, and the chair was gone. Brianna had a young man from the delivery company carrying it into the garage. "We're staging the den for the reveal," Brianna said brightly. "Just for a few weeks, Ruth. You won't even miss it." I missed it the first night. I missed it the second night. By the end of the week, I had learned the word staging, which I had not known before. Staging, Brianna told me, was the process of making a room look like a room where somebody else might want to live. I did not say out loud that I was the somebody else who already lived there. I just nodded, and I went to bed early, and I read my book sitting up against the headboard with the lamp tipped too far forward. My mail began to disappear next. At first, I did not notice. The mail carrier, Mr. Wendell, had been walking our block for almost 15 years, and I had always been the one to bring the mail in from the box at the end of the drive. But that October, my hip had been acting up, and Gerald had started offering to bring the mail in for me on his way back from his morning walk. It was a kindness. I took it as a kindness. It took me nearly 3 weeks to notice that the envelopes from my cardiologist's office were not arriving the way they used to. When I mentioned it to Gerald, he frowned. "That's strange," he said. "I'll keep an eye out." The envelopes started arriving again after that, but they arrived opened. Gerald said he had opened them by mistake, thinking they were addressed to him. I told him it was fine. I told myself it was fine. My father's voice, somewhere in the back of my mind, said, "Paperwork matters," very quietly, the way a bird calls from a tree you cannot quite see. By late October, Brianna had begun staying for dinner. It started with one evening. Gerald suggested it over coffee. She had worked late, he said. It would be unkind to send her out into traffic without a meal. I made a chicken pot pie. We ate it in the dining room, under the light fixture my daddy had hung in 1972. Brianna complimented my cooking. She said her own mother had never learned to cook, which was why she herself lived on salads. She said this in a way that made me feel as if eating a chicken pot pie might be a thing a certain kind of woman had stopped doing in the year 2000. After that first dinner, there were other dinners. 3, then 5, then a number I stopped counting. Gerald began pouring her a glass of wine. He began lighting a candle in the middle of the table, the tall white taper candles I had only ever used for Thanksgiving and Denise's wedding. I watched Brianna laugh at Gerald's stories I had heard so many times I could recite them in my sleep. I watched her touch his wrist, lightly, the way a woman touches a man she has decided she is not afraid of yet. I told myself that Gerald was an old man who liked being listened to. I told myself that some men, when they retire, need to feel young again, and that a young woman laughing at his jokes was a harmless thing, like a cologne a man might wear because it reminded him of a summer in 1976. I told myself those things, and every night, after Brianna left, I cleaned up her wine glass and put it in the top rack of the dishwasher, and I ran my thumb along the rim where her lipstick had left a small crescent mark that the dishwasher never quite got out. One evening in early November, Gerald came up behind me while I was washing that wine glass by hand. He put his hands on my shoulders. He kissed the top of my head. "You're tired, Ruthie," he said. "You should go up to bed. I'll finish." I let him finish. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of our bed in the lamplight, and I looked at my hands. They looked like my mama's hands. They had looked like my mama's hands for almost 20 years now. I pressed them flat on my knees. I listened to the sound of Gerald's laugh drifting up the stairs, and then underneath it, the sound of a second laugh, lighter, younger. A laugh that was still in my kitchen, even though I had not heard her come back in. I did not go downstairs. I sat on the edge of that bed, and I told myself the second laugh had been the television. I told myself that so firmly that I almost believed it. Quiet disrespect grows in tiny pieces. You would be surprised, when you are living inside it, how small the pieces can be. A kettle on the wrong burner, a chair in the garage, an envelope with the flap already loose. A second laugh in your own kitchen after dark. You would be surprised too how long a woman will pretend she has not noticed because she is afraid of what it will cost her to admit that she has. In the middle of November, Gerald sold the hardtop convertible he had driven since 1998 and bought a newer one. It was a small red car, very low to the ground, the kind of car a man my husband's age should not have been climbing in and out of at all. He came home with it on a Saturday morning, grinning like a boy. I told him it was beautiful. I told him he deserved it. I meant both of those things, because I was still the kind of wife who meant both of those things, even when a small, cold feeling had begun to form in the bottom of my chest. 2 weeks after the red car, Gerald started going to the gym. He had never, in 38 years of marriage, willingly lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. He came home from his first session smelling of a cologne I did not recognize, and he went into the bathroom and closed the door before I could kiss his cheek. 3 weeks after the gym, Gerald started trimming his beard differently. He started wearing a shirt I had never bought for him, a slim, pale blue shirt with pearl buttons that looked like something out of a magazine Brianna would have read. He started checking his phone at the dinner table. He started laughing, sometimes at nothing, the quiet, private laugh of a man reading something he did not intend to share. And my appointment with Dr. Ellington was waiting for me at the other end of all this, circled on the calendar in the kitchen in red pen. The triple bypass, the 12 to 14 days in the hospital, the 6 weeks of recovery. My father's voice, by then, was no longer quiet. It was louder every morning when I woke up, and it was saying the same thing it had always said. Paperwork matters. But I did not listen to it yet. I was still telling myself that I was imagining all of it. I was still telling myself that quiet disrespect grows in tiny pieces, and that if I did not name it out loud, it could not become a floor I was standing on. That is the dangerous thing about that kind of telling. Eventually, the floor finishes building itself anyway, and you find out you have been standing on it for a very long time. The first real crack in the story I had been telling myself came from a child. It almost always does. Children do not know yet how to lie the way grown people lie. They only know how to repeat. It was a Sunday afternoon in the second week of December, about 2 weeks before my surgery. My daughter Denise had driven up from Atlanta with her husband Marcus and their 2 girls for an early Christmas visit. The older girl, Amara, had just turned 9. She had long braids with small wooden beads at the ends, and she had opinions about almost everything, which she had inherited from her mother, which her mother had inherited from me. Amara had always loved my kitchen. She loved the pencil marks on the wall, where my daddy had measured me every year until I was 17, and where I had measured Denise every year until she was 18, and where I had been measuring Amara and her little sister Kayla every summer since they could stand. That afternoon, Amara and I were making oatmeal cookies together, with raisins, the way my mama had made them. Gerald was upstairs taking a nap. Denise and Marcus had taken Kayla out to the park. Amara was cracking eggs into a bowl. She cracked eggs very seriously, with both hands, the way I had taught her. She did not look up when she said the thing she said. "Grandma," she said, "is Miss Brianna your friend?" I smiled. I kept stirring the butter and the sugar. "Miss Brianna is helping Grandpa with the kitchen, baby," I said. "She's doing the decorating." "She sleeps over sometimes," Amara said. The wooden spoon in my hand stopped moving. I kept my voice gentle because she was a child, and because children read a grown woman's voice the way they read a page of a book. "She sleeps over, baby?" "Sometimes," Amara said. "When you have your book club. She has a purple bag she brings. It has a toothbrush in it. She leaves it in the guest bathroom. Grandpa said not to tell because it's a grown-up secret about the surprise renovation." "But you already know about the renovation, so I thought it was okay." I looked down at the bowl. I looked at the little swirl of butter and sugar, and I kept my hand very steady on the wooden spoon. "Oh, sweetheart," I said. "That's just a game Grandpa was playing. Don't you worry about it. Let's get these raisins in." That was my lie, the small lie of self-protection. I have thought about it many times since. I do not regret it. I could not have said anything else to a 9-year-old child in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. But I have thought about it because it was the first lie I had ever told inside that house, in my whole life. And it tasted like a coin on my tongue. Amara dropped the raisins in. She did not ask any more questions. Children forget quickly when the grown-ups seem calm. 20 minutes later, she was sitting on the living room rug with her colouring book, and my daughter was back from the park, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter, and the edge of something burning that no one else could see. That night, after Denise and Marcus and the girls had gone back to the hotel, I stood in the hallway outside the guest bathroom for a long time. I finally opened the door. I opened the cabinet under the sink. Behind the rolls of toilet paper, tucked almost but not quite out of sight, was a small purple canvas bag. I did not touch it. I just looked at it. There was a travel-size toothpaste sticking out of the open zipper. There was a round pink hairbrush. There was the edge of a silk nightgown, pale, the colour of new butter. I closed the cabinet. I closed the bathroom door. I went into my own bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the tub, and I pressed my hands flat against my knees, the way I had been doing a lot lately. And I did not cry. I did not cry because I did not yet know what I was going to do. And a woman who cries before she knows what she is going to do will spend all her strength on the tears. My mama taught me that. She also taught me that there is a certain kind of cold that settles in a woman's chest the first time she truly sees her husband. Not the husband she thought she had, but the husband she actually had. And that cold, once it arrives, does not leave until the thing it came for has been finished. That cold arrived in my chest that Sunday night, and it never fully left again. The next morning, I got up at 5 o'clock, earlier than I usually did. I made coffee in the old coffee pot because Gerald had not been able to convince me yet to replace it with the fancy one Brianna had suggested. I wrapped myself in a shawl and went out onto the back porch, under the oak trees my daddy had loved. The sky was grey. The grass was covered in the first real frost of the winter. I sat in the wooden rocker Daddy had built in 1975, and I rocked, and I thought. I thought about 38 years of marriage. I thought about a convertible, a blue shirt, a kettle on the wrong burner, a wingback chair in the garage, an envelope from my cardiologist with the flap already loose. I thought about a purple bag under a bathroom sink. I thought, too, about a morning in 1980 in a brick building on South Tryon Street, when my daddy had taken me up a set of narrow stairs to see a lawyer whose name I had almost forgotten. I thought about the brown leather folder. I thought about the trust papers. I thought about a signature, mine in the looping childish cursive of a 21-year-old schoolteacher, on a line that said primary grantee. I thought about my daddy's voice. "A house keeps what a house owns, Ruthie." and for the first time since I had gotten the news about the surgery, I understood that my father had not been being dramatic back in 1980. He had been looking at a young man he could not yet see, in a year that had not yet come, under a sky that was not yet grey. He had been seeing this morning, this porch, this frost, this cold in my chest. He had been telling me in his own quiet way to keep standing. I went back inside. I made eggs, I made toast. I served Gerald his breakfast the way I had served him his breakfast for almost 4 decades, and I kissed his forehead on the way out of the dining room. He smiled at me. He patted my hand.
He said I looked tired. He said he loved me. I said I loved him too. And then, while he was in the shower, I went upstairs to the cedar chest in the corner of our bedroom. I moved aside the stack of my mother's quilts. I lifted out my father's old brown leather folder. I carried it downstairs, still in my bathrobe, and I sat at the kitchen table, at the place where my daddy's pine table scar made a long, pale line along the corner. I opened the folder. Inside were the papers, the deed, the trust, the copy of Charles Whittaker's business card, yellowed now, the corners soft with age. And beneath those, the sealed letter from my father, with the drop of wax the colour of dried oak that I had not touched since 1998. I did not open the letter that morning. I was not yet ready. I closed the folder. I wrapped it in a kitchen towel. I carried it back upstairs and I put it in the drawer of my own small writing desk, the desk Daddy had built for me when I was 16. And I turned the key in the drawer, and I dropped the key into the pocket of my bathrobe. Paperwork matters. I had the shower shut off upstairs. I heard Gerald humming, the way a man hums when he believes his life is going well. I heard, very faintly, the edge of a cough from my own chest, the cough that Dr. Ellington had told me was a signal from the heart that was about to be cut open in a little under 2 weeks. I went back to the kitchen. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, and I sat at the table under the pencil marks on the wall, and I began, very quietly, to plan. I did not plan anything dramatic. I did not plan a scene. I did not plan a phone call. I did not even plan a conversation with my husband. What I planned was very simple, and very slow, and very southern, which is how my daddy had taught me that a black woman in North Carolina plans anything important. I planned to watch. For the next 10 days, I watched everything. I watched Gerald's face when his phone buzzed at the dinner table. I watched the way his shoulders settled when Brianna's car pulled into our driveway, and the way they relaxed another inch when her heels clicked across our hardwood floor. I watched the second laugh in my own kitchen at night, and I no longer told myself it was the television. I watched the mail, and the envelopes that arrived with the flaps already loose, and I began to put my cardiologist's envelopes in a small stack in the back of my writing desk drawer, under the folder where Gerald never looked. I watched Brianna. I watched the way she moved through my house, as if she had drawn the blueprints herself. I watched the way she touched the moulding in the dining room, the moulding my daddy had cut with his own hands, and said the word, dated. I watched the way she said, when the renovation is finished. Always when, never if. I watched her sit on my porch swing one afternoon in the watery winter sunlight, and I watched her look up at the facade of the house with the exact expression a woman wears when she is imagining what she will change about a dress she has already decided to buy. I watched, and I did not say a word. And in the middle of that watching, 3 days before I was scheduled to go into the hospital, I made the telephone call I had been preparing myself to make since the morning I had taken the brown leather folder out of the cedar chest. I called Charles Whittaker. I made the call from the kitchen at 9 in the morning,
when Gerald had gone to his gym and Brianna was not scheduled to arrive until 11. I had taken the business card out of my father's folder the night before. The number printed on it was a landline, and I had no real hope that it would still be in service, since the card was 44 years old. But I had looked the firm up in an online directory, and the firm was still there, on the same second floor of the same brick building on South Tryon Street, and the landline number matched. A young woman answered on the second ring. "Whittaker and Hayes," she said. "How may I direct your call?" I took a slow breath. "My name is Ruth Caldwell," I said. "I was Ruth Hamilton when your firm last knew me. My father was Walter Hamilton. I was hoping to speak to Mr. Whittaker, if he is still with the firm." There was a small pause. "Mrs. Caldwell," the young woman said, "Mr. Whittaker is still with us. He doesn't practice full-time anymore, but he is a senior partner. May I ask what this is regarding?" I hesitated. I had rehearsed this part in my head, but the words had sounded better in my head than they did in my kitchen. "I'm calling," I said finally, "because something in my life has become unclear, and my father told me many years ago, when I was 21, that if anything in my life ever became unclear, Mr. Whittaker was the man I should call." Another pause. This one was different. It had the quality of a person writing something down. "Mrs. Caldwell," the young woman said, "please hold for one moment." She did not put me on hold for a moment. She put me on hold for almost 2 full minutes. When the line picked up again, the voice on the other end was older, calmer, the voice of a man who had spent his whole life in a small office with a brown leather folder. "Ruth," he said, as if 44 years had not passed. "This is Charles Whittaker. I have been waiting a long time to hear your voice." I sat down at the kitchen table. I put my hand on my daddy's pine scar, and I began to cry, very quietly, for the first time since Amara had cracked the eggs into the bowl. "Mr. Whittaker," I said, "I think I need help." "Ruth," he said, "tell me what is happening. Take your time." And I told him everything. The kitchen remodel, the young woman, the kettle, the chair, the convertible, the blue shirt, the mail with the loose flaps, the second laugh, the purple bag under the sink. I told him, last, about the triple bypass and the 12 to 14 days in the hospital, and the conversation Gerald and I had not yet had about what would happen to the house while I was gone. Charles Whittaker did not interrupt me once. When I had finished, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I will never forget. "Ruth," he said, "your father was one of the wisest men I ever represented. He came to me in 1979, before you turned 21, and he asked me to structure that property in a way that no husband, no court, and no event of any kind could ever undo. I told him it was unusual. I asked him why he was doing it. He told me he had watched his own mother lose a home in 1953 to a man who had charmed her. He said he was not going to watch the same thing happen to his daughter. He said, and I remember it exactly, 'A house keeps what a house owns, and I'm going to make sure my daughter always owns hers.'" I could not speak. "Ruth," Charles said, "that house on Magnolia Lane has never been marital property. It has never been subject to equitable distribution in the state of North Carolina. Your husband has no legal claim on it, and he has never had one, not on the day he married you, and not on any day since.
I understand this may be difficult to hear, but I think you need to hear it today, and not next week. Mr. Whittaker, I said, I am going into the hospital on Monday. I know you are, he said. Your call came at the right time. Ruth, I am going to come to you. If you will permit it, I would like to come to the hospital on Sunday evening, before you are admitted, and again on Tuesday, after your surgery, if you are well enough. I would like to bring the folder. I would like to walk you through everything, the way your father asked me to walk you through it, the day you needed it. He left a letter for this day. Did you know that? I knew there was a letter, I said. My voice was very small. I have never opened it. Don't open it yet, Charles said. Let me read it with you. That was what your father wanted. I nodded at my kitchen table, even though he could not see me. All right, I said. All right, Mr. Whittaker. Ruth, he said before he hung up, I want you to do something for me. Between now and Sunday, do not say a word of this to your husband. Do not change your routine. Do not hint at it. Do not give him any reason to believe anything has shifted. Can you do that? I thought about the 38 years I had spent learning how to keep the peace. I thought about the 1,000 small silences I had kept inside my marriage, most of them because I had believed they were making our home stronger. I understood for the first time that I was now going to keep a silence for a different reason. Not to keep the peace, to keep myself. Mr. Whittaker, I said, I can do that. I have been keeping quiet my whole life. I just never knew I was practicing for this. He laughed gently. It was a good laugh. It reminded me a little of my father. Ruth, he said, your father told me once that you were stronger than you believed. I see he was right. We hung up. I sat in my kitchen in the thin winter sunlight, at the table my father had built out of pine boards in 1975, and for the first time in many months, I did not feel cold in my chest. I felt still. I felt almost steady. I felt most of all the quiet presence of a man who had died 26 years earlier, standing behind my shoulder with a hand on it, reminding me that he had already thought of this day long before I had been ready to. Charles Whittaker came to the hospital on Sunday evening, as he had promised. I was already in my room on the cardiac wing by then, in the thin cotton gown they give you, with the plastic bracelet on my wrist and an IV port already placed in the back of my hand in case of overnight medications. Gerald had left for the evening. He had kissed my forehead the way he had been kissing my forehead for 38 years, and he had said he would be back first thing in the morning before surgery. He had been, to anyone watching, the picture of a devoted husband. Charles came at 7 o'clock. He was an older man now, much older than I had been picturing. He was 83. His hair was entirely white, and he walked with a cane carved of some dark wood with a silver head. He wore a grey suit and a tie the colour of a robin's egg. He had a young paralegal with him, a serious woman in her 30s named Ms. Delacroix, and he had the brown leather folder, the original brown leather folder, from my father's office visit in 1980, tucked under his arm. He sat down in the blue vinyl visitor's chair beside my hospital bed. Ms. Delacroix sat in a second chair by the window. Charles placed the folder on the bedside table, and he opened it, and he began. He walked me through every page. He explained what my daddy had done and why. He explained the Life Estate Trust. He explained the structure under North Carolina law. He explained that the trust had a successor clause, which meant that when I passed, the house would go to Denise and then to Amara and Kayla, and that nothing any judge, any husband, any second husband, any creditor of a husband, or any buyer my husband might attempt to bring to the property could ever change that. Ruth, he said, your father built this for you the way a man builds a storm cellar. He did not build it because he was sure a storm would come. He built it because he wanted to know that if one did, you would be underground before the wind ever touched your roof. I nodded. I could not say anything. The stitches, of course, were not in me yet, but a different kind of stitching was happening along the inside of my chest as Charles turned each page. When he got to the end of the folder, he lifted out a sealed envelope. The wax seal on the back was the colour of dried oak. He held it for a moment in his old hand, and he looked at me. "This is your father's letter," he said. "He wrote it in the spring of 1997, about 14 months before he passed. He gave it to me with instructions. I was to hold it until the day his daughter called me and told me something in her life had become unclear. He told me I was to open it only with you in the room, and only if you asked me to. He said it was your letter, and you had the right to say when it was read." I looked at the envelope. My hands were not very steady. I could see my father's handwriting on the front, the neat, slanted print of a man who had learned his letters in a small country schoolhouse and had always been proud of them. One word was written there in his careful hand. "Ruthie." "Please, Mr. Whittaker," I said. "Please read it to me." He nodded. He broke the seal with his thumbnail. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. He cleared his throat, and he read my father's voice into that hospital room 44 years after the night I had first sat with my daddy in his office on South Tryon Street, and almost 26 years after my daddy had last spoken to me in this world. "My Ruthie," the letter began. "If Charles is reading this to you, then something has shifted in your life that you could not name by yourself. I am sorry for that. I have prayed for many years that this letter would never leave Charles's drawer and would be burned, unread, by his granddaughter someday. But I have lived too long on this earth to pretend that the best prayer is the only prayer worth praying. Sometimes a man has to pray for the sun and also build the house with a roof that does not leak. I want you to remember something. The house on Magnolia Lane is not a gift. A gift can be taken back. The house is not a favour. A favour can be resented. The house is a piece of ground with your name on the paper behind it, and a paper with your name on it is the quietest kind of protection a woman can carry in this world. You have carried this paper for 44 years, Ruthie, whether you knew it or not. You have stood on your own ground every day of your adult life. No man has ever been able to move you from it, because no man has ever owned it. If your marriage is not what you believed it was, that is not your shame. That is his. If a man has treated your home like something he could rearrange without asking, that is not your mistake. That is his. And if another woman has walked through your front door as if the threshold did not know her, I want you to remember that the threshold knows every foot that has ever crossed it, and the threshold chose you in 1973, when I laid the first board of it down. Trust the paper, Ruthie. Trust Charles. Trust the quiet. You do not have to shout to be heard by the ones who ought to be listening. You only have to stand. I love you. I have always loved you. Your mama and I are watching over you every morning under the oak tree. Daddy. Charles folded the letter. He set it gently on the bedside table. He did not look at me for a moment because he was giving me privacy with my own face. I did not weep loudly. I did not weep the way a woman weeps in a movie. I wept the way I had learned to weep in my own life, which is the way a woman of a certain age in our community has always wept. Quietly, with both hands flat on her lap, while the water comes and goes without disturbing anything else in the room. After a little while, I was able to speak. "Mr. Whittaker," I said. "Charles, what do I do now?" He smiled. It was a small, professional smile, but it was kind. "Tonight," he said, "you rest. Tomorrow you go to surgery. You will focus on your healing, and you will let the doctors do their work. You will let your husband come to the hospital. You will let him hold your hand. You will let him believe that nothing in your life has changed. And while you are doing that, Ms. Delacroix and I will quietly do a few small things on the outside. We will prepare a certified copy of the deed. We will prepare a cease and desist letter, drafted in advance, which will sit in my office unused unless and until you tell me to use it. We will prepare a clean notice of non-marital property, just in case it is ever needed in a courtroom. These are not things we use, Ruth. These are things we carry, the way a doctor carries a syringe in his bag. He hopes he never has to use it. He brings it anyway. I nodded. "When you are ready to come home," Charles said, "you call me. We will decide together what you want to do." "Charles," I said, "I already know what I want to do." He looked at me. He waited. "I want to come home a week early," I said. "I want to see what has happened to my house while I was gone. And I want to walk through my own front door carrying the deed." Charles Whittaker closed the brown leather folder. He put his hand, very briefly, on mine. His hand was old and cool and steady. "Ruth," he said, "your father would be proud of you. Your mother, I think, would be a little afraid, but your father would be proud." "My mother was often a little afraid," I said. "That is why I am going to do it my daddy's way." He laughed once, softly, and then he and Ms. Delacroix packed up their folder and they left me to sleep. And I slept that night better than I had slept in 6 months. The triple bypass surgery took 7.5 hours. I woke up in the recovery room with a tube down my throat and a blur of faces over me, and the feeling that somebody had taken an axe to the center of my body. I remember very little of the first 2 days. I remember Gerald's voice at one point telling me I was doing well. I remember Denise's voice, late at night, singing a hymn my mama used to sing. I remember the nurse with the gentle hands, Ms. Yolanda, who told me on the 3rd morning that I was doing better than most women half my age. Gerald came to the hospital every day. He sat in the blue vinyl chair. He held my hand. He told me how much he loved me. He told me how frightened he had been. He told me that when I came home, I would barely recognize the kitchen because Brianna was working day and night to have it ready for me as a homecoming surprise. I listened to him say all of this, and I looked at his face with the quiet attention of a woman who had finally stopped pretending she could not see what she was seeing. Gerald was afraid. That was what I finally understood, lying in that hospital bed. He was not afraid for me. He was afraid for himself. He was afraid that I would live too soon, and come home too soon, and find what he had done with the time I had been gone. He did not know that was exactly what I was planning. My cardiologist cleared me for early supervised discharge on day 8. It was Dr. Ellington who did it, and he did it because I asked him to. I explained to him, very honestly, that I needed to go home, and that home was the only place I could finish healing. He did not ask me why. He only asked me if there would be someone in the house to watch over me, and I told him my daughter was already driving up from Atlanta and would be in the house by the time I got there. That was not entirely true. Denise was in Atlanta, and she had offered to come, but I had asked her to wait. I had told her I would call when I needed her. I had told her, on the phone the night before, a very small piece of the truth. Not the whole shape of it, but enough of it that she understood I was going to do something quiet and important, and that I needed to do the first part of it alone. "Mama," she had said very softly on the phone, "I am proud of you." I said, "Baby, I have not done anything yet." She said, "Yes, you have." On the morning of day 8, I packed my small bag. I put on the grey sweatsuit Denise had left for me. I signed my discharge papers. Ms. Yolanda walked me down to the front of the hospital in a wheelchair, because that is the rule, even when a woman has been walking the halls for 3 days. A car from a service Charles had arranged was waiting for me at the curb. Gerald did not know I was coming home. I had called him from the hospital phone that morning and told him I was feeling a little low and I did not want visitors until the evening. He had sounded surprised and then relieved. He had said, "Of course, Ruthie, I'll see you around 7. He had not asked me where I was going to be between now and 7. Gerald had stopped asking me where I was going to be quite some time ago. The car drove me first to South Tryon Street. I did not go upstairs. Charles came down to the curb himself, with his cane, and he handed me a sealed envelope through the window of the car. Inside the envelope was a certified copy of the deed to the house on Magnolia Lane, stamped and notarized, with my name on it in a font that nobody could argue with. Also inside the envelope, folded behind it, was the cease and desist letter. It was drafted in calm, almost gentle legal language. It gave Gerald 30 days to vacate the property, and it made it clear that he would have no standing to contest. "Ruth," Charles said through the window, "you do not have to use the second page tonight. Carry it. Decide inside your own house. I will be at this number until 9 o'clock. After 9, I will be at my home number, which is also in the envelope. Call me at any hour." "Thank you, Charles," I said. He placed a hand on the window frame. "Ruth," he said. "Stand." That was all he said. The car carried me out of downtown Charlotte, along the roads I had driven 1,000 times in my life, past the gas station where my daddy used to buy me peppermint candy when I was small, past the church where Gerald and I had been married in 1987, past the elementary school where I had taught for 34 years, past the little park where Denise had learned to ride her first bicycle. I watched all of it go past the window of the car, and I held the envelope in my lap with both hands, and I did not open it. We turned onto Magnolia Lane at 7:38 in the evening. The oak trees my father had loved were bare against the winter sky. The street was very quiet. Most of my neighbours' houses had their porch lights on and their curtains drawn. My own porch light was on too. I could see it glowing through the bare branches as the car approached. The driver slowed. I told him to stop at the edge of the driveway, not in it. He nodded. He was a younger man, a heavy-set man with a soft voice, and he asked me very kindly if I wanted him to wait. "Wait at the curb, please," I said. 30 minutes. If I do not come back out in 30 minutes, you may leave." "Ma'am," he said, "I will wait longer than that." I smiled at him. I do not know why, but his kindness settled something in me that had been restless all afternoon. "Thank you," I said. "You are a good young man." I got out of the car. The cold air caught me across the chest. I felt the incision pull, but it was a familiar pain by now. A pain I had come to understand was the sound of my own body healing. I walked up the driveway slowly. The gravel crunched under my shoes. I could hear, somewhere inside the house, the faint sound of music playing. It was a kind of music Gerald had never listened to in his whole life. A soft, low, slow kind of music that a younger woman might choose for a winter evening. I reached the porch. I paused at the bottom of the 3 wooden steps my father had built in 1973. I looked up at the front door, at the small oval window Daddy had put into it so that my mama could see who was coming without getting out of her chair. The oval was dark. The porch light was very bright. I climbed the 3 steps. I took my key out of the pocket of my sweatsuit. I slid it into the lock. The key turned, the way it had always turned for 44 years. The door swung open. The entryway smelt different. That was the first thing I noticed. It smelled of a candle I had not bought. Something sweet and heavy with an undernote of vanilla. The kind of candle a woman of 34 might buy at a specialty store. The rug on the floor was not the same rug. My rug, the old woven one my mama had made with the border of blue flowers, was gone. In its place was a thick, cream-coloured rug with a geometric pattern. I stepped inside. I closed the door behind me, softly, as if I were a guest in someone else's home. I set the sealed envelope from Charles on the small table beside the door, next to a silver bowl I did not recognise, and a pair of long, silver earrings that were not mine. The music was louder now. It was coming from upstairs, and over the music there were voices. A man's low voice, a woman's light, clear laugh. I stood in the entryway for a long moment. I did not call out. I did not announce myself. I simply listened. And I knew, standing there in my own front hall, under the transom light my father had cut the frame for with a handsaw in 1972, that I had come home to exactly what I had known I would come home to. There was no part of me that was surprised. There was no part of me that needed one more piece of proof. The purple bag under the sink had been the last piece I needed, and I had found that piece in December. Now I was simply here to look at it with my own 2 eyes. I picked up the envelope from the table again. I held it against my chest, gently, where the stitches were. I walked slowly to the foot of the stairs. I rested my hand on the newel post my father had turned on his lathe in the garage in the summer of 1972. I thought of my daddy. I thought of the way he used to stand at the foot of those stairs every Sunday morning when I was a little girl and call up to my mama that it was time for church in his big, warm, reassuring voice. I thought of the way he had come down those stairs for the last time on the morning in 1998 when he had passed in his sleep, and I had been the one to find him. I thought of all the feet that had crossed that threshold in 51 years, and I thought, for the first time in my life, about what my daddy had written in his letter. The threshold knows every foot that has ever crossed it, and the threshold chose you in 1973. I began to climb the stairs. I climbed them slowly because the stitches would not allow me to do anything else, and because I was not in a hurry. I took them one at a time, the way I had taken them as a little girl, when the stairs had seemed very tall to me. The wooden steps creaked under my weight in the same places they had always creaked. The 3rd step from the bottom, the 7th, the next to last. My daddy used to say those creaks were the house's way of announcing a visitor. I had always thought that was a sweet thing to say. Tonight, I thought it was a useful thing to say. The music grew clearer as I climbed. It was definitely not the television. It was coming from behind the door at the end of the hallway, the door to the bedroom I had shared with Gerald for 38 years. The door was not fully closed. It was open by perhaps 4 inches. Warm light came through the opening, a yellow lamplight, the colour of the bedside lamp I had bought in 1996. I reached the top of the stairs. The hallway runner was also new. It had been replaced while I was in the hospital. The runner I had chosen in 2007 was gone. A long, pale grey runner had taken its place. I walked along it, silently, my sneakers not making a sound on the soft wool. I reached the bedroom door. I did not push it open all at once. I stood there for perhaps 5 seconds. I heard Brianna's voice very clearly now. She was laughing. I heard Gerald's voice answer her. He said something about wine. She said something about mourning.
They were not trying to be quiet. They had no reason to be. They believed they were alone. I pushed the door open. Brianna laughed one more time and then she saw me. The laugh turned into a gasp. She was sitting up in my bed, in the bed Gerald and I had shared for almost 4 decades, the bed Daddy had helped us carry up the stairs in 1987, the bed where Denise had been conceived in the spring of 1988. Brianna had on my silk bathrobe, the cream silk bathrobe Denise had given me for Mother's Day 3 years ago, and she was holding a glass of red wine that was not mine either. Gerald was sitting on the edge of the bed with his back to the door, in a t-shirt and boxer shorts, looking at something on his phone. He heard Brianna's gasp before he saw me. He turned his head. The blood went out of his face in 2 separate stages. First, the colour under his cheekbones, then the colour along his jaw. He opened his mouth. He did not say anything. I stood in the doorway in my grey sweatsuit. My hair had not been washed in 3 days. My chest had a long incision down the middle of it, closed with thin wire and careful surgical thread. My left hand held the sealed envelope from Charles Whittaker. My right hand rested gently on the frame of my own bedroom door. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not even change my expression. "Please get dressed," I said. "Both of you. And come downstairs. There is something I need to show you before either of you says another word." I did not wait for them to answer. I turned, slowly, so that I would not pull the stitches, and I walked back down the hallway along the pale grey runner I had not chosen. And I went down the stairs one at a time, my hand on the banister my father had carved. I walked into my own kitchen. The marble island Gerald had chosen sat in the middle of it, with a pendant light hanging over it that had cost, I imagined, more than my first car. The new cabinets were a pale, warm white. The floor was a wide, polished oak in a herringbone pattern. None of it looked like the kitchen my father had built. None of it looked like the kitchen my mother had cooked in. None of it looked like the kitchen where I had rolled oatmeal cookies with my granddaughter a month earlier. It looked like a photograph in a magazine. I set the sealed envelope down on the marble island. I pulled out one of the high stools Brianna had picked out, and I sat down on it, carefully, because my chest would not let me do anything quickly. I folded my hands on the cold stone in front of me. I could hear, upstairs, the sound of 2 people moving in a great hurry. A drawer opened and closed. A voice rose briefly and then dropped. A pair of heels clicked across the floor. The shower did not turn on. There was no time for a shower. I waited. I was not in a hurry. I had waited 38 years for the quiet woman inside me to find her own voice, and I could certainly wait another 7 minutes for my husband to put on a pair of pants. They came down the stairs together. Gerald had pulled on a pair of khakis and a sweater.
His feet were bare. His hair was not combed. He looked, for the first time in the years I had been watching him, old. Not old like a man who had earned his age, but old like a man who had forgotten how old he was until a minute ago, and was now remembering it all at once. Brianna followed him. She had put on a pair of jeans and a sweater of her own. The silk bathrobe was gone. Her dark hair was slightly mussed, her lipstick had been wiped off in a hurry, and there was a pale smudge at the corner of her mouth she had missed. She walked down the stairs with her chin up, which I will give her credit for. Most women in that situation would not have been able to keep their chin up. Brianna did. She had practiced the skill of walking into rooms that did not belong to her, and she was going to practice it one more time. They stood at the edge of the kitchen. Neither of them sat down. I did not invite them to. "Ruthie," Gerald said. His voice cracked on the second syllable of my name. "Ruthie, please."
"Let me explain. Gerald," I said, "please do not say my name like that. You have not said my name like that in a long time, and I do not believe you. Please come and sit down at this island. And Miss Shaw, please come and sit as well. This will take only a few minutes of your time." Gerald walked to the island. He sat on a stool. He put his hands flat on the marble, which I noticed because I had never seen his hands tremble like that before. Brianna walked to the island. She sat down. She did not tremble. She lifted her chin another quarter inch. I opened the envelope. I took out the certified copy of the deed. I laid it face up on the marble between us so that both of them could see it. I did not point to anything. I did not explain anything yet. I simply set the paper down and let it sit there, the way my father would have set a paper down. "Gerald," I said. In June of 1979, my father, Walter Hamilton, signed a set of papers in the office of an attorney in downtown Charlotte named Charles Whitaker. The papers placed this house, and the land underneath it, in a life estate trust. The trust was structured so that in the state of North Carolina, the house and the land could never become marital property under any circumstances. Not by marriage, not by divorce, not by joint tax filing, not by a husband's assumption of the mortgage, nothing. My father did this the year before I turned 21. He did it 7 years before I met you. He did it 8 years before we were married. Gerald did not move. His mouth had opened a little, but he was not speaking yet. I signed the receiving papers the month I turned 21, I continued. My name has been the only name on the deed of this house since 1980. When we were married, I did not change anything. I did not put your name on anything. I did not add you to the deed. I did not quitclaim any portion of the land. You never asked me about it, Gerald. In all these years, not once. I believed that was because you trusted me. I have come to understand, over the last few months, that it was because you were not paying attention. Brianna made a small sound. It was not quite a word. I did not turn to look at her yet. The house we are sitting in, I said, has been mine for the full 44 years I have owned it. It was mine on the day I met you, Gerald. It was mine on the day we were married. It was mine on the day our daughter was born. It was mine on the day you retired. It was mine during every day I spent in that hospital over the last 8 days. It is mine tonight. I slid the deed a few inches closer to him. He did not pick it up. He did not need to. His eyes had stopped moving. "Ruth," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Ruthie, I did not know." "I know you did not know," I said. That is not your fault. It is, perhaps, the only part of this that is not your fault. But it is the reason we are having this conversation at this kitchen island and not somewhere else. Brianna spoke. She's bluffing, Gerald, she said. Her voice was much higher than I had heard it before. She had lost, for that one sentence, the careful polish she had been wearing around my house for 4 months. This is a stunt. Old deeds don't work that way anymore. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I turned my face to her. I did it slowly. I did not raise my voice. I looked her in the eye for the first time since she had appeared in my bedroom doorway in a silk robe that was not hers. Miss Shaw, I said, my father paid a lawyer in 1979 to make sure an old deed would still work in the year 2024. My father, Miss Shaw, was a black carpenter in North Carolina in 1979. When a man like my father paid a white lawyer to structure a piece of property, he did not leave anything to chance. He paid that lawyer to make certain that 44 years later, a young woman in my kitchen would not be able to use the word bluffing. Brianna's mouth closed. I reached into the envelope again. I pulled out the second document, the one Charles had called the second page, the one he had said I did not have to use tonight. I considered it for a moment. I set it down on the marble, face up, so that Gerald could read the heading. The heading read in neat black type, "Notice to vacate." Gerald, I said, this letter has been prepared by Mr. Whitaker's office. It gives you 30 days to remove yourself and all of your personal belongings from this property. It does not go to your employer. It does not go to the police. It does not go to any court. It is private. It is quiet. It is a letter between my attorney and you. And I will place it in the mail tomorrow morning, if you give me any reason to. If you do not give me any reason to, I will not mail it. I will hand it to you instead the evening you walk out of this door for the last time, so that you will remember what I am prepared to do, and what I decided not to do, because I once loved you. Gerald's eyes had filled. A tear moved across his cheek. He did not wipe it away. I love you, Ruthie, he said. His voice was very thin. I have always loved you. I made a mistake. I am a fool, and an old fool. And I am begging you. Gerald, I said, please do not beg at my kitchen island. It would make me lose the last of the respect I have for you. And I would like to save a little of that respect for myself, not for you. You have 30 days. You will not sleep in this house tonight. You will go to a hotel tonight. Miss Shaw will also go to a hotel tonight. Tomorrow you may come back between 9 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon to pack your clothes. Miss Shaw will not come back with you. Miss Shaw will not come back to this property at any point. If she does, the letter on this island goes in the mail by 5 o'clock the next day. Is that clear? Ruth, Gerald said, I will do whatever you ask. I turned back to Brianna. Miss Shaw, I said, will you please stand up and take the bag that you keep under the sink in my guest bathroom? It is purple. It has a toothbrush in it. I would like it out of my house this evening. Brianna stood up. She did it stiffly. For the first time since I had met her, the careful young woman with the opinions about flow and staging did not have anything to say. She walked to the guest bathroom. She was gone for 30 seconds. She came back with the purple bag. She did not look at me. She walked to the front door. Miss Shaw, I said, just as she reached the threshold. She turned. The silver earrings on the front hall table,
I said. "Those are yours, I believe. Please take them with you. I will not be able to look at them in the morning." She picked up the earrings. She put them in the purple bag.
She walked out into the winter night, and she pulled the door closed behind her, and her heels clicked down the 3 wooden steps my father had built in 1973. I heard a car engine start somewhere down the block. I did not look at Gerald yet. I sat with my hands on the cold marble, and I waited, because the cold air had come through the open door for a moment, and the incision in my chest had pulled at me, and I needed to breathe. When I spoke again, my voice was softer. "Gerald," I said, "my daddy once told me that a house keeps what a house owns. He said that to me on the porch of this house the year he met you. He said it about you, though he did not say your name. I did not understand him then. I understand him now. I wish you had understood it too when I told you about him. You never asked me, Gerald. You never asked me whose name was on the paper behind these walls. And I never told you because I did not think I needed to. I thought a marriage was the paper. That was my mistake, and I will carry it with me. But the house is not my mistake. The house is my father's gift." Gerald was weeping now. It was a quiet weeping into his hands. "Ruthie," he said, "please." "Gerald," I said, "it is time for you to go to the hotel. Please pack a small bag. Please do not go into the bedroom for more than 10 minutes. You may take anything you need for tonight and tomorrow morning. The rest we will arrange. I will be in the den. I will be sitting in the wing-back chair that you and Miss Shaw moved into the garage. I have asked the driver outside to bring it back in before he leaves. I would like to sit in my own chair in my own den tonight. I have been away from it for too long." Gerald stood up. He walked to the stairs. He climbed them slowly, the way a man climbs stairs when he has finally understood that he has lost something that cannot be carried back down. I sat at the island for a little while longer. Then I pushed myself up, carefully, mindful of the stitches. I walked to the front door. I opened it. The driver was still at the curb. I raised my hand to him, and he got out of the car immediately, and I told him what I needed. He was a large, gentle man. He walked to the garage and he found the wingback chair in its green fabric, and he carried it back into the house by himself. He set it down in the corner of the den where it had lived for 37 years. He asked me if I needed anything else. I told him no. I told him to drive home safely. I told him I was sorry he had had to wait so long. "Ma'am," he said, "I would have waited all night." I watched him drive away. I closed the front door. I locked it. I turned off the porch light for the first time in a week. I sat down in my wing-back chair, in the corner of my own den, under a lamp my father had rewired in 1984, and I listened to Gerald moving around upstairs, packing a small bag. He came down after 10 minutes. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at me across the room. I did not stand. I did not speak. "Ruth," he said. I nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was only the small, final recognition that we had been married for 38 years, and that something was being laid down now that could not be picked up again, and that I wished him no harm as he walked out the door. He walked out. He closed the door quietly. A car started in the driveway. It pulled away. I was alone in my own house. I did not cry. I sat in my chair, and I looked at my father's pencil marks on the kitchen wall through the den doorway, and I thought about my mama who had chosen a window in an upstairs bedroom in 1972 that she would never get to sit beside. I thought about Charles Whittaker, who had been waiting 44 years to open a brown leather folder. I thought about my daughter, Denise, who had told me that she was proud of me before I had done anything yet. And I thought about Amara, who had cracked eggs into a bowl on a Sunday afternoon in December and told me an innocent thing that had set a whole world moving under my feet. I reached for my phone. I called Denise. "Mama," she said before I had even said hello. She had been waiting. "Mama, are you all right?" "Baby," I said. "He's gone. They're both gone. Tonight." There was a long pause on her end of the line. And then my daughter said something that I will remember as long as I live. "Mama," she said, "I'm already in the car. I'll be there by midnight." "Baby," I said, "drive safely." "Mama," she said, "I have been driving this road in my head for a month. I know every curve." I laughed. It was a small laugh. It was the first laugh that had come out of me in my own kitchen in a long time. It felt strange and good, and a little tender around the edges of the incision. I hung up the phone. I stayed in my chair. The rest of the story is not, perhaps, what the world expects a story like this to be. The rest of the story is quiet. That is how my daddy would have wanted it. And that is how I wanted it, too. Gerald came back the next morning between 9 and 11. He packed his clothes and his personal papers and the books from his side of the bedroom bookshelf. He did not come down to the kitchen. He did not try to see me. Denise sat at the top of the stairs while he packed, with her arms folded, in the way only an angry adult daughter can sit at the top of a set of stairs. Gerald nodded to her once, and she did not nod back. She told me later that he left with 3 suitcases and a leather briefcase, and the red convertible that he would discover by the end of the month he could not actually afford without my name on anything. He did not contest the cease and desist letter, because I did not have to mail it. Charles kept it in his office. It sat there, unmailed, for the full 30 days. Gerald was out of the house on day 26. He moved into a small apartment on the south side of town. I have not seen him in person since. Brianna Shaw left Charlotte within 3 weeks. I do not know where she went. I did not ask. A friend of mine from the book club told me some months later that Brianna had tried for a short time to claim that she had been misled by the situation, and that some of the women in the design community in Charlotte had quietly stopped returning her calls. That was all I ever heard of her. That was more than I wanted to hear. Denise stayed with me for 2 weeks. She cooked, she cleaned, she called my cardiologist twice a day. She watched over me the way my mama had watched over her own mother in 1974, and the way I had watched over Denise in 1989. Amara called me every evening on the phone to ask me if I needed anything. She never mentioned the eggs, and she never mentioned Miss Brianna. And I never brought either subject up. A 9-year-old girl does not need to carry the weight of what a 9-year-old girl has accidentally started. That is a grown woman's work. The kitchen Brianna had built stayed. That surprised me, I think, more than anything. I had expected to hate it, and I had imagined myself tearing it out board by board. But in the end, it was a good kitchen. The marble was beautiful. The pendant light was beautiful. The herringbone floor was beautiful. I cooked in it. On the 2nd week after Denise went home, a pot of oxtail stew my mama had taught me in 1968. And I realized, somewhere around the 3rd hour of the stew, that a house can take in a thing that was brought into it in bad faith,
and turn it slowly into something of its own. My daddy's house did that with the kitchen. It took what Brianna had built, and it made it a part of the house on its own terms. And now, when I stand at that island, I am not standing at Brianna's island.
I am standing at Ruth Caldwell's island, in Ruth Caldwell's kitchen, in the house her father built under 2 oak trees in 1971. I put the wingback chair back in its corner of the den. I put my mama's woven rug back in the entryway. I replaced the pale grey hallway runner with a warm red one that I chose for myself, because for the first time in 38 years, I did not have to ask a single other person what they thought of my choice. Denise calls me every Sunday. Amara calls me every Wednesday. Charles Whittaker calls me every first of the month to check in, because that is the kind of lawyer he is, and because his daughter, who works in the firm now, has promised him she will do the same for me after he is gone. I have made new friends in the church I returned to after the surgery, the church I had slowly stopped attending in the last few years because Gerald had wanted to sleep in on Sunday mornings. I did not notice, when I was inside it, that I had given up my own church for the sake of my husband's habits. I notice things like that now. That is one of the things that has changed in me. I sit on the back porch most evenings, weather allowing, under the oak trees my daddy loved. I rock in the same wooden rocker he built in 1975. I think often about the long, strange path that my father's quiet decision in 1979 took to reach me in the year 2024. I think about a young black lawyer with a brown leather folder on the second floor of a brick building on South Tryon Street. And I think about the thin wax seal on the letter that sat in his drawer for 26 years, waiting for me to be ready to hear it. I think about my daddy's hands on my shoulders, the day he told me a house keeps what a house owns. And I think about how little of what he said to me in this life I listened to properly the first time. I have learned 3 things in the months since I came home from the hospital. I have learned them the hard way, which is the only way a woman of a certain age learns anything. I want to share them with you tonight, because I think you may be listening from somewhere. A kitchen in Atlanta at 1 in the morning, or a bedroom in Birmingham at 11 at night, or a small apartment in London at 6 in the morning, or a porch in Kingston at 8 in the evening. And I think one of these 3 things may be waiting for you too. The first thing is this: paperwork matters. It is not a romantic thing to say, and I know it is not the kind of sentence you expect a widow or a wife to say at the end of a story. But I am going to say it anyway, because my daddy said it to me 44 years ago, and it saved my life. If there is a paper behind the walls of the place you call your home, a woman is wise to know whose name is on it. Not because she does not trust her husband, because she is a grown woman, and a grown woman has every right to know where she is standing. The second thing is this: quiet disrespect grows in tiny pieces. It does. A kettle on the wrong burner, a chair moved to a garage, an envelope with a loose flap, a laugh in your own kitchen after dark, a purple bag under a bathroom sink. If you are noticing one small piece, I promise you there are other pieces you have already taught yourself not to notice. A woman's life is a house. A house has foundations. Check your foundations. Sweep your own floor. Do not wait until you are standing on a whole floor of tiny pieces before you admit what you built. And the third thing is this, and it is the most important. A house keeps what a house owns. Sometimes the strongest love that has ever been offered to you in this life was offered to you a long time before you needed it. by a person who is no longer here to see you use it. A father who signed a paper in 1979. A mother who chose a window in 1972. A grandmother who taught you to cook oatmeal cookies with raisins. They did not love you for the day that they were alive. They loved you, if they were good people, for every day you were ever going to live. Their love is still working for you, right now, behind the walls of your life. Your only job on the hard nights is to trust that it is there and to stand on it. That is all I know. I am Ruth Caldwell. I am 67 years old. I live in a craftsman-style house on Magnolia Lane, outside Charlotte, North Carolina, under 2 oak trees my father planted in 1971. My name is the only name on the deed. It has been the only name on the deed for 44 years. It will be the only name on the deed until the day I pass it on to my daughter Denise, and then to her daughters after her. My husband is no longer here, and my father is no longer here, but one of them gave me a paper, and the other did not. And I have finally learned the difference between a man who gives you a piece of his name and a man who only gave you a piece of his time. If this story touched you tonight, if you have ever stood in a doorway of your own life and realized that the laugh you were hearing was not meant for you, I would like to hear from you. Take a moment to like this video and please subscribe to this channel, because stories like mine live longer when there are more ears to carry them. And tell me, in the comments below, 2 things. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there right now? Whether it is 11:47 in the evening in Atlanta, or 2 in the morning in Chicago, or 6 in the morning in Accra, or 9 in the evening in a small town in the north of England, I would like to know that you are out there. Sometimes on the hard nights, the only thing a woman needs to keep standing is the knowledge that another woman, somewhere in the world, is standing at the same time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. My daddy would have been pleased to know you were there. My mama would have offered you a slice of pie. And as for me, I'm going to sit on my back porch now, under my father's oak trees, in a wooden rocker he built with his own 2 hands in 1975. I'm going to watch the evening come, and I'm going to remember, one more time tonight, the 3 quiet things a man I loved told me a long time ago, so that I could come home to myself, alone, at the age of 67, in the only house I ever owned. Paperwork matters. Quiet disrespect grows in tiny pieces. And a house, my daddy said, keeps what a house owns. Good night, friend. Sleep well, wherever you are.